So big grand ideas do not resonate with other people. People just don't see what you're trying to say and what you're trying to get at. And it's been my experience time and time again, the reason why an idea that I have does not take off is simply because it is being too lofty. And every time that I get into the in-depth sort of understand things that are on the street, projects seem to work a little better that way. I'm more interested in that particular project, and then other people get what I'm trying to do with that particular project. There is rarely anything that starts from the lofty side and goes down and has a sort of big grand vision, because you just get lost in the weeds. You don't really know what you're talking about and you don't really get there. But if you start with something very simple, very practical, very everyday in your regular life, then you seem to get you make a lot of progress on that. So what do I mean by all of this? I'm going to give you examples just by looking around at this moment, because I think a lot of people sort of forget that everyday life is really, really cool. So, I've got this container here. I don't know if you've seen these things before, but they're the earbuds containers that you have. Well, nobody has sat down and tried to study the industry behind how that thing actually formed. Where did the idea come from to have this shape? What did it look like when they first started? What was the prototypes like? What's the battery that's in there? How does that actually all work and come together? What was the creative process in terms of getting people to understand that that's what we needed, was this other container? Where is it being forecasted to go in the future? Now, these are very practical, sort of everyday questions, but they can be easily turned into something that was a little bit more lofty, where we think about, so for example, we might think about foresight with product development, for example. We might think about ideation in product development. We might think about the plastics industry and how the plastics industry evolved over time. You can see that it really gets really big and very quickly to start asking these questions, and you just simply have to start and be practical in your everyday life. That's why I always say, do things that are on your bucket list, or things that you always wanted to do, or things that you spend a tremendous amount of your time and effort on, because that's your everyday life. That's what you're living, and it's going to benefit what you're going to do. What are the things that I really, really want to do in my life? What are the things that are really interesting that I've always wanted to do? Well, maybe you've always wanted to visit all these different water parks around the country, around the world, or go visit all of the theme parks that are in the, around the United States, around the world. I mean, hell yeah, talk about an amazing research project to do that, where you actually start investigating theme parks and the evolution of theme parks, or the evolution of water parks. How did water parks start? What does that cause from? That's kind of an interesting question, because it's totally frivolous. And yet, we spend a lot of money on that industry. That's kind of interesting to think about it. What is the entertainment industry in terms of the water park? What is going on there? What is going on with the technology itself behind that? What is driving it? Then, the awesome thing is you get to visit all of those places and go talk to those people and actually get to do those things. Maybe you really love to motorcycle. Well, then study the motorcycle industry. That's going to be really fun and interesting for you. And there's lots to be said about that. And maybe you want to study, so for example, you want to study mergers and acquisitions, for example, sort of a lofty thing that I just think it's very lofty and it's not very easily understood. We know what those things are, but it's just very abstract. And so if that's the case, then you study mergers and acquisitions within the motorcycle industry, or maybe you like bug collecting, then you look at mergers and acquisitions within collectors of bugs, because that does happen, right? So there is people that maybe have really nice bug collection, and then somebody else is over there that has another bug collection, and then they acquire that entire bug collection, and maybe they have somebody that was actually going to be part of that. I mean, these things happen. Coin collection is another one that you can sort of think about. You just have to start looking at your everyday life and then just start layering on top one little sort of lofty element of what you're trying to do. Now you have to keep layering on top in the future in terms of coming up with a theoretical angle to explain and explore this thing of what mergers and acquisitions in the bug collecting industry looks like. But you have to keep doing that, where you do things that are interesting to you and that are part of your everyday life, or things that you've always wanted to do, and start tackling those particular things. So, I'm going to give you a few more examples, and then we're going to go just from our everyday life. So, t-shirts have not always looked like this. The synthetic fiber that's in this t-shirt has evolved in the last few years. And so it would be interesting to study the evolution and the growth of synthetic fibers and what has driven that, what has been the sort of motivation behind that. So if you're somebody that was interested in, say, there's this theoretical lofty angle of population ecology, where you look at things, and a lot of it's how industry or firms evolve and survive and die. So you might look to see at how the synthetic fiber industry has evolved. What has been the impetus of that? What has driven the growth of people using synthetic fibers? Was it kind of, is it all just Adidas or Adidas and Nike that does that at this moment? Probably not. There's probably lots of one-off little companies that are doing that at this moment. What does the impact of Amazon have on synthetic fibers production? I buy a lot of stuff from Amazon now. In fact, maybe this t-shirt was actually bought from Amazon. And, what has that done to small startups? Has it benefited them, or has it not benefited them? So you could see that there's just so much to study, and the world is so very, very interesting. Another interesting thing, so maybe you're in chemistry right now, and you're interested in something, you're trying to figure out this particular thing. Well, you just look around, and I've got, I've got some oil on my skin just from regular everyday life. And, what does this oil, what's the chemistry makeup of this oil? What can we do to, benefit people that have too much oil or too little oil, and think about the chemical compounds for that? That's going to have very practical implications, and people understand it. But then you can get into some really interesting sort of theoretical models of how this actually works, and model all those different things. So as you could see, really the best thing that you can ever do is just do something that you're interested in, that's in your everyday life, that you really want to do. So I'd encourage you to, if you're struggling at this moment, don't go lofty. Go and do things that you really want to do. If you want to go to visit water parks, study the water park industry. Please, I want to see this. I think that would be so awesome, because I have not seen this. You want to see somebody, I would love for somebody especially living in Florida, I would love for somebody to study the theme park industry. Hardly anybody does that. Like, how cool would that be to study that and get into understanding what that particular thing is? There's been some really weird phenomenon that have happened in the news right now. So this sort of growth of the GameStop scandal, that could be interesting to study how that actually evolved, and what's that about, and how industry regulators can control that, or the stock market can control these kind of things. What is the impact of machines in the stock market? There's just so many things that you can study. You just have to simply pick it that you're like, I kind of like that. That's something I like, and just run with it. If you love breakfast cereals, go study what breakfast cereals are all about. There's a whole industry behind it. And then maybe if you're a chemistry person, you might study better tasting breakfast cereals. Like, just don't take the lofty, I have to sort of change the world sort of viewpoint, and don't absorb that immediately. That comes later. You need to get that traction to see what are the problems that are out there, what are the big lofty problems that people get, and then you layer that on top of what you're trying to do. It doesn't start, the sort of deduction view that people have with science. I'm not a big believer in that because I don't think that's where ideas come from. Ideas come from our everyday life.